Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist David Percy. And our first graphic today, hazardous weather graphic, and flood advisory continues for the western Kenai Peninsula, and that's in effect until 2:15 p.m. Sunday afternoon. So tonight, Saturday night into the afternoon Sunday. And for possible minor flooding in low-lying areas, the best chance of seeing any minor flooding would be along the Yukon River, along the Kenai River. And then same sort of thing going on with the flood advisory northeast Prince William Sound. Again, minor flooding of low-lying areas possible, and that's out also into early afternoon Sunday. And from there, looking at satellite imagery, you can see clouds about precipitation over the eastern interior today. And amounts ranged from 1/4 inch up at Delta Junction, as well as Anchorage picked up a 1/4 inch, and so did Seward during the day today. That associated with the moisture over the southern part of the state, obviously, and low pressure there tracking east-southeast, southwest of the Pribilofs, brought some clouds and moisture to the eastern Aleutians and the St. Paul area, with clouds up across the southwest interior into Norton Sound, but a clear area from the Seward Peninsula eastward into the central Tanana Valley areas produced sunshine today, and then more clouds on up toward the Arctic coast. Panhandle seeing some clouds with a weak system off the north coast persisting, but no precipitation, pretty much dry there today, with temperatures approaching 70 at Juneau, with pretty mild temperatures down to the south. Shelter Cove, I believe, had 83 degrees at 3 p.m. this afternoon. Stewart, 77 degrees. Cake and Heidelberg, both at 71, so very nice conditions down there. Light winds, some sunshine, and dry. On the chart today, you can see that frontal boundary right along the southwest coast across Bristol Bay, and that brought about 1/2 inch of rain to Kodiak Island during the day today, with breezy southeast winds, but stronger winds, gusts to 35 to 45 miles an hour out over the central Aleutians, that tighter gradient on the backside of the low out there, with lighter winds, but fog, low clouds, rain, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, on up to the Pribilof Islands, and again some clearing over the central interior there out to the Seward Peninsula, and then mostly cloudy for the north slope onto the Arctic coast. But wind's pretty light up in that area, and showers scattering out. Rainfall ended at Delta Junction about 10:30 or so this morning. Those continue to move off into Canada and dry out a little bit as more rain pushes up into the Kenai Peninsula area ahead of that frontal boundary on that southerly flow. There's that weak system off the coast of the Panhandle, but most of the shower activity remained off the coast. Otherwise, it was partly to mostly sunny there. Not much change tonight. If that trough could push a shower or two into the north coast, just a risk, and won't amount to very much if it does, but that'll keep the northern Panhandle cloudier than the southern areas. So most of the clearing will be down to the south there. Otherwise, rain advances northward across the western interior up to the Yukon River, with the clear area kind of shifting north to the Noatak, Kobuk, Koyukuk, Selawik Valley areas into the Yukon Flats. Weak trough brings a chance of moisture to the eastern Arctic coast and Brooks Range. Otherwise, not much going on for the Arctic coast or the North Slope during the day for tonight, with maybe some low clouds and fog in those areas. And now the low center moving up to, let's see, on Alaska. So that area of gusty winds will start to shift slowly eastward there, but still pretty windy with north winds possibly gusting to 45 miles an hour for Atka Island. Winds will be increasing for Nikolsky tonight. Widespread area of rain covering all of the southeast Bering Sea from Adak eastward to the Alaska Peninsula, but the heaviest rainfall will be in advance of the front, Kodiak Island up into southern and southwest Cook Inlet and the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, with light rain all the way up to the Yukon River, and pushing eastward to about Cape St. Elias. And for the outlook Saturday, mostly sunny, warm, highs in the 60s and 70s for the southeast coast with light winds. Periods of rain begin to diminish, it looks like, late tomorrow over northern Cook Inlet, Mananuska-Susitna Valley, kind of becoming a little more showery but wet for the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, down to Kodiak Island, with that front stalled out right over the island, pushes up into the southwest interior, so periods of rain, Bristol Bay and the Kuskokwim Delta, southern Kuskokwim Valley, more of a intermittent rain or shower conditions for the Yukon Delta into Norton Sound. And winds gusting 30-35 miles an hour to the north-northwest with periods of rain and fog or showers from the Pribilofs down to the eastern Aleutians. Lighter winds with low clouds, fog, IFR conditions there for the Alaska Peninsula. Could see some clearing there out over the Adak-Atka area, and then the next warm front trying to push some moisture into the western Aleutians, but it really falls apart on Sunday. As you can see, just a remnant there of that as it pushes into that high pressure area, kind of shears apart. So just a little bit of moisture out there, wind's not a factor. That low center now drops south of the Alaska Peninsula, and that kind of pulls the front back down a little bit. So Kodiak Island staying under the influence of the moisture flow ahead of the front, looks like through Sunday, so periods of rain there with winds not too bad though, but it's going to be a wet weekend there into Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. Notice it dries out with that low center pulling southward. Pretty good chance of maybe some clearing. Definitely going to see drier conditions across southern Alaska on Sunday. Copper River Basin partly sunny. Panhandle another mostly sunny day with temperatures in the 60s and 70s. And then a trough, kind of a narrow band of light shower conditions there from the eastern Brooks Range down into the Koyukuk Valley, following the Yukon River right out to the delta there. But any amounts will be pretty light, and it's a pretty narrow area. Look for mostly sunny, possible clearing there for the western Arctic coast and North Slope areas. Moving on to temperatures, due to data flow problems, southern Alaska didn't make it into the graphics here, but lows tonight in the 50s to near 60 over the Panhandle, 47 for Yakutat, otherwise the central and northern interior in the 40s, and 30s from the Brooks Range on out to the Arctic coast. And for highs tomorrow, 72 or in the 70s for the southern southeast coast, mid to upper 60s elsewhere, and then cooling back to 60 around Yakutat. Highs 65 to 71 for the eastern interior, central Tanana Valley areas eastward, and upper 30s for the central and eastern Arctic coast and North Slope, and otherwise upper 50s, lower 60s out to the Seward Peninsula, but mid 40s for St. Lawrence Island area. And McGrath, Nikolai, Collier highs about 61. Otherwise, to the west there in the upper 50s. And for Sunday morning, Anatuvik Pass dropping a shade below the frost point there to 31. Otherwise in the 30s, lower to mid there for the North Slope and the Arctic coast. South of the Brooks Range, though, 40s, mid 40s, warm to near 50 there for the central interior areas, and mid 40s for Eagle. Otherwise, the Panhandle looking at lows in the 50s once again, lower to mid 50s. And then for Sunday afternoon, highs 66 to 76, call it, for the southeast coast, and warmer up in the Tanana Valley there in the eastern interior, anywhere from 70 to maybe 75. Still cool on the Arctic coast, especially the east side, mid-30s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather, again, IFR from the Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast for Saturday morning, and a small area of IFR north shore of the Seward Peninsula through the Bering Strait coast down to St. Lawrence Island. Southeast Bering Sea, lots of IFR, Atka Island to the Pribilofs, right on up across the southwest coast and the Yukon Delta. Marginal VFR, the Kuskokwim Delta, back to IFR, southern Kuskokwim Valley down to, say, Togiak Bay, Dillingham, King Salmon, those locations. Kodiak, IFR, southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, southern Kenai Peninsula, IFR, up into Resurrection Bay, western Prince William Sound, northern Cook Inlet, Mananuska-Susitna Valley, all IFR to start the day out. Good VFR, central interior, down into the eastern Copper River Basin, VFR for the Panhandle. And for the afternoon, VFR flying conditions for the entire southeast coast continue, and the eastern North Gulf Coast, IFR in the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range with marginal VFR, northern Cook Inlet, Mananuska-Susitna Valley to the Alaska Range and the western Copper River Basin. Good VFR in the interior again, except the lower Yukon River Valley and Delta area, with some IFR along the southwest coast into the Auckland Mountains, northern Togiak Bay, and eastern Bering Sea, all IFR. Bristol Bay marginal, Fox Islands IFR, Atka VFR, and more IFR coming into the western Aleutians, North Slope Arctic Coast IFR. And for Sunday morning, IFR eastern Beaufort Sea coast down into the central and eastern North Slope to the Brooks Range, and marginal VFR just south of the Brooks Range there, but not too far. So the interior valley is looking good. Looks like some marginal VFR possibly up into the Tanana Valley there, but mostly along and south of the Alaska Range. Southern Kuskokwim Valley, marginal VFR becomes IFR down toward Togiak again, and along the southwest coast. Kodiak IFR, and some southwest Prince William Sound IFR, Montague Island, and stays VFR for the Panhandle, and IFR shimmying at 2 with some VFR for Adak and Atka. That becomes marginal for the central Aleutians Sunday afternoon, with still eastern Bering Sea right up to the Strait, down to the Fox Islands, Alaska Peninsula, all IFR. IFR for the North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island, VFR for the Panhandle, and better conditions in over southern Alaska now. Some marginal VFR with areas of VFR breaking out. IFR eastern Arctic coast. Passes Anatuvik, marginal VFR becomes VFR. Upward trend for Adigan as well. Lake Clark and Merrill, occasional IFR for the day Saturday. Rainy, marginal. Windy, marginal VFR, maybe on the southern entrance, otherwise VFR. Isabel, marginal VFR. Mintasta looking pretty good for the day Saturday with VFR flying expected there. Tanita, marginal VFR, and Portage starting out IFR, gradually improving to marginal VFR. And Chilkoot and White, VFR for the next couple of days. Freezing levels 2,000 to 6,000 feet across the north slope there to the Brooks Range. Southern Alaska 8,000 to 12,000 feet, and out in the Bering Sea 6,000 to 8,000 feet to the Aleutians. And icing, southerly flow pushing considerable moderate rime icing up into the southern Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet areas, Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast during the day tomorrow, and areas of isolated moderate icing out over the southwest interior down to the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. And the jet stream showing that south-southwest flow pushing the moisture northward with a trough axis right over the Alaska or southeast Bering Sea. Strong 110 knot northerlies there coming across the central Bering Sea to Atka Island, and at 9,000 feet 40 to 50 knot southerlies Kodiak Island on up into the western Alaska Range. North 50 knots across Atka Island, and northeast 40 knots just south of St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise, pretty light winds for the central and northern interior, as well as the Panhandle, eastern Gulf of Alaska areas. And for 3,000 feet, low pressure near or just south of the Alaska Peninsula, southern Bering Sea, and the central Aleutians, 40 to 45 knot northerlies, and southeast 40 knots right across Kamishak Bay there into the southern Kuskokwim Valley area. And as far as turbulence goes, look for considerable moderate turbulence, surface to 6,000 feet, Kodiak Island, northeast Bristol Bay, the Aleutian Range, southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, and the western Alaska Range into the southern Kuskokwim Valley, as well as the Fox Islands westward to Adak, with light turbulence, light to moderate chop for the Brooks Range, especially the western and central areas.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission, GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limon-Disk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. and when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time, compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And looking at Friday's sea ice analysis, you can see pretty much holding a stationary status quo, although the heavier ice there is now up under the label for the most part, but still some light concentrations on the eastern coastline there. And again, just a slow melting will continue for the next several days. And from there, looking at the marine forecast for the south coast, west-northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. For the north coast, variable winds at 10 knots. And Lynn Canal, looking at a north wind at 10 knots, northwest at 10 for Stevens Passage. And Clarence Strait, northwest winds 15 knots. And for Sunday, from the north coast, east winds 10 to 15 knots, variable winds at 10 knots for the central coast and the south coast, northwest at 10. Light winds continue over the inside channels as well, with Clarence Strait at 10 knots out of the northwest, Stevens Passage variable to north at 10, and Lynn Canal south at 10. Prince William Sound, northeast winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. In the western North Gulf Coast, small craft advisories, southeast winds 25 knots with 6-foot seas. Small craft advisories for Cook Inlet for north to northeast winds 25 to 30 knots, strongest south of the Forelands and Kamishak Bay. Small craft advisories, east winds 30 knots. And for the Barren Islands on Sunday, east winds at 30 knots, seas just under 10 feet. 30-knot east winds also continue for Kamishak Bay and Cook Inlet. Northeast winds 15 to 20 knots, 4 to 5-foot seas. And for the North Gulf Coast, east winds 20 to 25 knots, Prince William Sound, northeast winds 10 knots, seas down to 2 feet. For Kodiak Island, we've got east-southeast winds tomorrow at 15 to 25 knots. The Alaska Peninsula, east to south winds 15 to 20 knots, and Bristol Bay looking at a southeast wind at 20 knots with 4-foot seas. And moving on to Sunday, small craft advisories, Kodiak Island, for northeast winds 30 knots in Shelikof Strait, southeast 25 knots on the east side. And for the Alaska Peninsula, north winds at 20 knots, northeast 20 for Bristol Bay with 5-foot seas. For the eastern Aleutians, small craft advisory, northwest winds 30 knots, seas 10 to 13 feet. Northwest winds 30 knots for Adak and Atka with 12 to 13-foot seas. And also Amchitka Island, northwest at 25. And for Sunday, 15-knot winds out over the western Aleutians, and the central Aleutians, small craft advisories northwest 25 knots. Eastern Aleutians, small craft advisories northwest at 30 knots. And for the Pribilof Islands on Saturday, looking at small craft advisories there, as well as St. Matthew Island, north winds at about 30 knots with 8 to 9 foot seas. For the Kuskokwim Delta coast, east winds 15 knots, but for the Yukon Delta coast, small craft advisories for north winds at 25 knots with 7 foot seas. St. Lawrence Island, north winds 25 knots with 8 foot seas. And for Sunday, small craft advisories continue for St. Lawrence Island, north winds 25 knots. And for the Yukon Delta coast, winds will be northwest at 20 knots, north 20 knots for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. Pribilof, small craft advisories, as well as St. Matthew Island, north at 25. And for the eastern Arctic coast, north to northwest winds 15 knots, central coast, northeast 15, east side or west side, winds will be east at 20 knots. Small craft advisories, though, from Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson, northeast 25. And for Sunday, from Wales to Cape Thompson, north winds at 20 knots, and then 30 knot winds from for the Western Capes there, out of the northeast at 30 knots east, 30 knots western Arctic coast, central and east side, northeast winds 20 knots with seas 5 feet. For tonight, mostly dry, that rain pushing northward though, up to the mid-Yukon River Valley areas, but the flats, Kobuk, Koyukuk valleys out to Kotzebue Sound into the Noatak Valley could see some clearing with dry conditions on the Arctic coast. Rain, moderate to heavy at times, begins to increase again over south central Alaska coming up from Kodiak Island. And a widespread area of precipitation over the southeast Bering Sea. Pretty gusty north winds to northwest winds over the Aleutians tonight, central Aleutians. Risk of a shower on the north coast of the Panhandle, otherwise dry with light winds there. And for Saturday, periods of rain begin to turn more showery and lighten up a little in the Manauskas-Susitna Valley. And Prince William Sound, kind of wet but drier toward Valdez, and the interior mostly dry all the way up to the Arctic coast. Panhandle mostly sunny with mild temperatures. And that's all I've got time for. Thank you for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.